Welcome to the Underclass Podcast with Austin Picard. I'm an independent researcher who can't stomach being lied to on a daily basis by the mainstream media, while we live in a fracturing society launched into parallel realities, falling perfectly onto the two sides of the political spectrum. I remain in the underclass. There's a quote long attributed to philosopher Edmund Burke, and it reads, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." In today's episode, we descend into darkness, if only to shine a light into the most evil and malignant corners of intelligence and high society, hoping to better understand the formidable threat we truly face. Through the disclosure of clandestine human trafficking networks, ritualized sexual abuse, and nefarious sexual blackmail operations, we are once again faced with the prospect of a modern society morally bankrupt, thoroughly imbued, indoctrinated, and placed on the pernicious path to self-destruct. Most people by now have become very aware of a man by the name of Jeffrey Epstein. When Epstein was convicted on child prostitution charges in 2008, Alexander Acosta, then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, agreed to a plea deal, later described as a sweetheart deal, which Alan Dershowitz helped to negotiate. It granted Epstein immunity from all federal criminal charges, along with 4 named co-conspirators and any additional unnamed potential co-conspirators. According to the Miami Herald, the non-prosecution agreement essentially shut down an ongoing FBI probe into whether there were more victims and other powerful people who took part in Epstein's sex crimes. At the time, this halted the investigation and sealed the indictment. NBC News reported that a federal judge later found that the prosecutors had violated victims' rights by concealing the agreement from the victims and instead urging them to have patience. Attorney Alex Acosta would later claim that he offered the lenient plea deal because he was told that Epstein belonged to intelligence, was above his pay grade, and to leave it alone. A clear perversion of justice, yet the talking heads in the corporate government-sponsored media outlets remained silent. Why would such a bombshell news story receive so little attention until it became necessary to regain control of the narrative? Instantly I thought of the ABC News anchor and Good Morning America reporter Amy Robach, who was recorded on a hot mic in 2019, insisting that producers at ABC refused to run her interview with alleged victim of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking ring, named Virginia Roberts.
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in it because of the planes. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton, we had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal. Other women backing it up. Hey, yep. Brad Edwards, the attorney, 3 years ago, saying there will come a day when we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific pedophile this country has ever known. I had it all 3 years ago. So do I think he was killed? 100%. Yes, I do. Because he made his whole living blackmailing people. Yeah. There were a lot of men in those planes, a lot of men who visited that island, a lot of powerful men who came into that apartment.
I mean, when I heard he was found in his cell,
I knew immediately. And they made it seem as though he made that suicide attempt 2 weeks earlier, but his lawyers claimed that he was roughed up by his cellmate around the neck. That was all like to plant the seed, and then that's why I really believe it. Like, really believe it.
He's got to have left evidence, like in the unexplained.
Well, Ghislaine Maxwell, who I had all sorts of stuff on her too. I love it. I'm like, it's so funny to hear everyone say her name now because I'm like, oh my God, like I had all the, and everyone was like, who's that? Who cares? I kept getting that. Who cares? She knows everything. She knows. She should be careful. Well, she was his, like, she went out and recruited all of these girls.
Stand by.
She should watch her back. Because if she goes, I mean, I'd have like security guards all around me.
Epstein's relationship with intelligence stands out as the primary reason he was protected for as long as he was, until becoming so overexposed that he was ostensibly hung out to dry as a disposable asset. His death, more than likely, was orchestrated once he became willing to name certain co-conspirators, and we will undoubtedly have to dedicate at least one entire episode to the story of Jeffrey Epstein in the near future. But for now, the main concern has been to establish his clear connections to intelligence, serving as an overlapping reference point for today's primary focus. A group known as the Finders, often in many circles referred to as the Finders cult. The official narrative surrounding the group has remained far too generous over the years, claiming that in the spirit of Mohandas Gandhi and Martin Luther King, the Finders believed in complete passivity when faced with assertive official authority, and that the movement was loosely based on the teachings and writings of the ancient Chinese Taoist philosopher Lao Tzu. Our story, however, begins with a brief introduction to the group, according to independent journalist Elizabeth Voss, published and found at Mint Press News. In February 1987, an anonymous phone tip was called into the Tallahassee Police Department, reporting that 6 children were dirty, hungry, and acting like animals in the custody of 2 well-dressed men in a Tallahassee, Florida park. That phone call would kick off the Finders scandal, a series of events and multiple investigations, even more bizarre than the initial report. The trail would ultimately lead to allegations of a cult involved in ritual abuse, an international child trafficking ring, evidence of child abuse confirmed and later denied, and ties with the CIA, which was alleged to have interfered in the case. No one was ever prosecuted in the wake of the initial 1987 investigation or a 1993 inquiry into the allegations of CIA involvement. Official denials were maintained, and authorities stated that no evidence of criminal activity was ever found. However, documents that have emerged over time beg significant questions as to the validity of the official narrative. The story is further complicated by the fact that it takes place in 3 basic stages. The initial 1987 investigation, spread across multiple states and law enforcement agencies, a subsequent 1993 inquiry into allegations of a CIA cover-up and interference in the 1987 investigation, and the emergence of Customs Service documents detailing new aspects of initial searches of Finders' properties, which was followed by the publication of hundreds of documents from both investigations to the FBI vault in 2019. By initially sensationalizing the issue via the framing of the Finders as a satanic cult, The media profited from immediate shock value, while permitting this very sensationalism to become the premise for dismissing other aspects of the story and Finder's ties to the CIA to remain unexplored. Even the Washington Post reported at the time in an article published February 7, 1987, merely 3 days after the initial arrests, that authorities investigating the alleged abuse of 6 children found with 2 men in a Tallahassee, Florida park discovered materials yesterday in the Washington area that they say points to a 1960s style commune called the Finders, described in a court document as a cult that allegedly conducted brainwashing and used children in rituals. D.C. police, who searched a Northeast Washington warehouse linked to the group, removed large plastic bags filled with color slides, photographs, and photographic contact sheets. Some photos visible through a bag carried from the warehouse at 1307 Northeast 4th Street were wallet-sized pictures of children, similar to school photos, and some were of naked children. D.C. police sources said some of the items seized yesterday showed pictures of children engaged in what appeared to be cult rituals. Officials of the U.S. Customs Service called in to aid in the investigation said that the material seized yesterday includes photos showing children involved in bloodletting ceremonies of animals and one photograph of a child in chains. Customs officials said they were looking into whether a child pornography operation was being conducted. Naturally, I felt inclined to seek out the original primary source document, leading me directly to the U.S. Customs report of the investigation into the Finders, filed in February of 1987. The first page of the report has the signature of Special Agent Walter Kreitlow, as well as the approval signature of Resident Agent in Charge Frederick Heidick, and begins with a brief statement. This office was contacted by the Tallahassee Police Department on February 5, 1987, who requested assistance in attempting to identify 2 adult males and 6 minor children, all taken into custody the previous day. The men arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse were being very evasive with police in the questions being asked of them pursuant to children and their condition. This agent contacted Special Agent Bob Harold, Resident Agent in Charge Reston, Virginia, and requested telephone numbers and names of police persons in area police departments in an attempt to follow up on 2 leads, which were a Virginia license number and that the children had commented about living in a Washington, D.C. commune. Subsequently, this office received a telephone call from the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, inquiring about the men and children. This office put the MPD and the Tallahassee Police Department in contact with each other. The second page of the report provides details of the investigation, followed by a memorandum written by U.S. Customs Special Agent Ramon J. Martinez, who participated in the searches of 2 of the Finders' properties in Washington. On Thursday, February 5, 1987, this office was contacted via telephone by Sergeant Joanne Van Meter of the Tallahassee Police Department, Juvenile Division. Sergeant Van Meter requested assistance in identifying 2 adult males and 6 minor children, ages 7 years to 2 years. The adult males were tentatively identified by TPD as Michael Houlihan and Douglas Ammerman, both of Washington, D.C., who were arrested the previous day on charges of child abuse. The police had received an anonymous telephone call relative to 2 well-dressed white men wearing suits and ties in Myers Park, apparently watching 6 dirty and unkempt children in the playground area. Houlihan and Ammerman were near a 1980 blue Dodge van bearing Virginia license number XHW 557, the inside of which was later described as foul-smelling, filled with maps, books, letters, with a mattress situated to the rear of the van which appeared as if it were used as a bed, and the overall appearance of the van gave the impression that all 8 persons were living in it. The children were covered with insect bites, were very dirty. Most of the children were not wearing underwear, 2 of which were confirmed to have been sexually abused, and all the children had not been bathed in many days. The men were arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse and lodged in the Leon County Jail. Once in custody, the men were somewhat evasive in their answers to the police regarding the children, and stated only that they both were the children's teachers and that all were en route to Mexico to establish a school for brilliant children. The children tentatively were identified as Mary Houlihan, white female, age 7, Max Livingston, white male, age 6, Benjamin Franklin, white male, age 4, Honeybee Evans, white female, age 3, BB, white male, age 2, and John Paul Houlihan, white male, age 2. The children initially indicated that they lived in tents in a commune in the Washington, D.C. area and were going to Mexico to go to a school for smart kids. This office contacted the office of the resident agent in charge in Washington, D.C., and spoke with Special Agent Bob Harold. This agent requested telephone numbers and names of police persons in the area departments that might be aware of said activities described by the children, and to follow up on the leads, which were the Virginia license number, and a check on the men's names with local law enforcement. A short time later, this office was contacted by Detective Jim Bradley of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. Bradley indicated that the case here in Tallahassee appeared to be strongly related to a case he was currently working in the Washington, D.C. area. He stated that the actions of the 2 men in custody in Tallahassee relative to children just might give his case enough probable cause for search warrants to search premises occupied by a cult group called the Finders. This agent directed Bradley to telephone Tallahassee Police Department and discuss with police directly any activities forthcoming relative to the instant case. At this time, it was determined that there was no customs violations found to exist, and therefore this case is being closed pending receipt of additional information. A subsequent memorandum attached to the U.S. Customs Report of Investigation, written to Resident Agent in Charge and submitted as a memo to file by Special Agent Ramon J. Martinez of the United States Customs Service, had a subject line reading, Customs Cooperation and Interest in Tallahassee and Washington Metropolitan Police Department Child Abuse Investigation. Martinez writes in the memo, on Thursday, February 5, 1987, the duty agent, Special Agent Bob Harold, received a call from Special Agent Walter Creetlow, United States Customs Service, Tallahassee, Florida. Special Agent Creetlow was seeking assistance in contacting an appropriate local police agency to coordinate a child abuse investigation with the Tallahassee Police Department. Special Agent Creetlow further requested assistance in checking some names, addresses, and a vehicle through the Customs Child Pornography Unit database, and stated that there was some suspicion of the subjects being involved in supplying children for the production of child pornography. Further, he was informed by the Tallahassee Police Department that the children may have been en route to Mexico from the Washington, D.C. area. The possibility of customs interest in the investigation due to possible violations of the Child Protection Act of 1984 and the alleged nexus with the U.S.-Mexican border were discussed and agreed upon. Agent Creetlow related the following background information. Creetlow was contacted by the Tallahassee Police Department for assistance in identifying 6 children and 2 adults taken into custody in the Tallahassee area. U.S. Customs was contacted because the police officers involved suspected the adults of being involved in child pornography and knew the Customs Service to have a network of child pornography investigators and of the existence of the Child Pornography and Protection Unit. Special Agent Creetlow stated, The two adults were well-dressed white males. They had custody of 6 white children, boys and girls, ages 3 to 6 years old. The children were observed to be poorly dressed, bruised, dirty, and behaving like animals in a public park in Tallahassee. The police were notified by a concerned citizen, and all 8 persons were taken into custody. The subjects were living out of a white 1979 Dodge van, Virginia license number XHW 557. Upon being taken into custody, the adult white males refused to cooperate, one of whom produced a business card with a name on one side and a statement on the other. The statement indicated that the bearer knew his constitutional rights to remain silent and that he intended to do so. Upon interviewing the children, the police officers found that they could not adequately identify themselves or their custodians. Further, they stated they were en route to Mexico to attend a school for smart kids. Special Agent Kretlow was further advised the children were unaware of the function and purpose of telephones, televisions, and toilets, and that the children had stated they were not allowed to live indoors and were only given food as a reward. After receiving the request from Tallahassee, Special Agent Harold contacted me while I was on official business at Customs headquarters. He requested that I conduct computer checks on the Customs Child Pornography Unit database. The checks were to be conducted on the names, addresses, and a vehicle provided by Special Agent Kretlow. After conducting the computer checks, I made direct contact with Special Agent Kretlow to inform him that all the checks were negative. At that time, I was informed by Special Agent Kretlow that the Tallahassee police had discovered large quantities of records to include computer disks and a U.S. passport in the van. From some of these records, the police had obtained tentative identification of the 2 adults and partial identification of the children. Furthermore, the 2 Washington, D.C. addresses had been discovered through these documents, one of which was verified through the vehicle registration. I advised Special Agent Kretlow I was leaving headquarters and he would be receiving a response to the remainder of his request from Special Agent Harold. I then left as stated and proceeded to conduct other business in the district. A short time later, at approximately 11:30 a.m., Special Agent Harold contacted me by radio and advised me that a Detective Jim Bradley of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, was interested in the information provided by Special Agent Kretlow, was in contact with Tallahassee, and would very probably be conducting search warrants in the area later in the day. He also informed me that U.S. Customs was invited to participate due to the continuing possibility of violations of law enforced by the Customs Service. As I was already in Washington, I terminated my other business and proceeded to make contact with Detective Bradley, Intelligence Division, MPD. Upon contacting Detective Bradley, I learned that he had initiated an investigation on the 2 addresses provided by the Tallahassee Police Department during December of 1986. An informant had given him information regarding a cult known as the Finders, operating various businesses out of a warehouse located at 1307 Northeast 4th Street, and were supposed to be housing children at 3918 and 3920 Northwest W Street. The information was specific in describing blood rituals and sexual orgies involving children, and an as yet unsolved murder in which the Finders may be involved. With the information provided by the informant, Detective Bradley was able to match some of the children in Tallahassee with names of children known alleged to be in the custody of the Finders. Furthermore, Bradley was able to match the tentative ID of the adults with known members of the Finders. I stood by while Bradley consulted with Assistant United States Attorney Harry Benner and obtained search warrants for the 2 premises. I advised Acting Resident Agent in Charge Special Agent Tim Holloran of my intention to accompany MPD on the execution of the warrants, received his permission, and was joined by Special Agent Harold. Special Agent Harold accompanied the team, which went to 1307 4th Street, and I went to 3918 and 3920 W Street. During the execution of the warrant at 3918 and 20 W Street, I was able to observe and access the entire building. I saw large quantities of children's clothing and toys, the clothing consisting of diapers and clothes in the toddler to preschool range. No children were found on the premises. There were several subjects on the premises. Only one was deemed to be connected with the finders. The rest were renting living space from this individual. He was identified as Stuart Miles Silverstone, date of birth 6/1941, U.S. passport number 0109589991. Silverstone was located in a room equipped with several computers, printers, and numerous documents. Cursory examination of the documents revealed detailed instructions for obtaining children for unspecified purposes. The instructions included the impregnation of female members of the community known as finders, purchasing children, trading, and kidnapping. There were telex messages using MCI account numbers between a computer terminal believed to be located in the same room and others located across the country and in foreign locations. One such telex specifically ordered the purchase of 2 children in Hong Kong to be arranged through a contact in the Chinese embassy there. Another telex expressed an interest in bank secrecy situations. Other documents identified interests in high-tech transfers to the United Kingdom, numerous properties under the control of the finders, a keen interest in terrorism, explosives, and the evasion of law enforcement. Also found in the computer room was a detailed summary of the events surrounding the arrest and taking into custody of the 2 adults and 6 children in Tallahassee, Florida on the previous night. There were also a set of instructions which appeared to be broadcast via a computer network which advised participants to move the children and keep them moving through different jurisdictions and instructions on how to avoid police attention. One of the residents was identified as a Chinese national. Due to the telex discovered referencing the Chinese embassy in Hong Kong, he was fully identified for future reference. Jingxin Wang, date of birth 9/27/47, place of birth Tianjin, People's Republic of China, passport number 324999, entered the U.S. on January 22, 1987, admitted until December 31, 1987. He is in the U.S. as a graduate student in the anatomy department of Georgetown University. His visa was issued on November 10, 1986 in London, England, number 00143. During the course of the evening, I contacted Sector 4 to initiate a text check on Silverstone and initiate an archives check on him for the last 4 years. I also contacted Special Agent Holloran to keep him advised of the proceedings and asked for and received permission to contact Special Agent Sullivan of the Child Pornography Protection Unit to query some names through the CPPU database. Special Agent Holloran told me he would call Southeast Region Headquarters to keep them posted on the proceedings as well. I later contacted Special Agent Sullivan for the stated purpose, and in the discussion that followed, I gave him some background on the purpose of the request. I advised him that the information was not for dissemination at headquarters, that Region was being notified, and that Region would probably contact headquarters later if deemed necessary. Special Agent Sullivan assured me that the information would go no further until official notifications was made by Region. No positive matches were obtained from the CPPU database. I was later joined at the W Street address by Special Agent Harold. Harold advised me that there were extremely large quantities of documents and computer equipment at the warehouse, and that MPD was posting officers inside the building there and sealing the building until morning, in which a second warrant for that premises would be obtained and executed. Special Agent Harold also advised me that the news media had been notified and had been waiting for the execution of the warrant at the 4th Street address. Detective Bradley later stated that the MPD public information officer had been contacted by a Tallahassee reporter. When it became apparent PIO had no information on the search warrants, the reporter contacted local media representatives, and a check of public records containing the affidavits for the search warrants disclosed the locations and purpose of the warrants. Detective Bradley surmised that someone on the Tallahassee Police Department was the original source of information for the press. I advised Agent Holleran of the involvement of the press, and he stated that he would, in turn, relay the information to Region. Special Agent Harold and I assisted in the transport of the evidence seized pursuant to the warrant and cleared MPD after the press left the area. On Friday, February 6, 1987, I met Detective Bradley at the warehouse on Northeast 4th Street. I duly advised my acting group supervisor, Special Agent Don Bloodworth. I was again granted unlimited access to the premises. I was able to observe numerous documents which described explicit sexual conduct between the members of the community known as finders. I also saw a large collection of photographs of unidentified persons. Some of the photographs were nudes, believed to be of members of finders. There were numerous photos of children, some nude, at least one of which was a photo of a child on display and appearing to accent the child's genitals. I was only able to examine a very small amount of the photos at this time. However, one of the officers presented me with a photo album for my review. The album contained a series of photos of adults and children dressed in white sheets, participating in a blood ritual. The ritual centered around the execution of at least 2 goats. The photos portrayed the execution, disembowelment, skinning, and dismemberment of the goats at the hands of the children. This included the removal of the testes of a male goat, the discovery of a female goat's womb, and the baby goats inside the womb, and the presentation of a goat's head to one of the children. Further inspection of the premises disclosed numerous files relating to activities of the organization in different parts of the world. Locations I observed are as follows: London, Germany, the Bahamas, Japan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Africa, Costa Rica, and Europe. There was also a file identified as Palestinian. Other files were identified by member name or project name. The projects appearing to be operated for commercial purposes under front names for the finders. There was one file entitled Pentagon Break-In, and others which referred to members operating in foreign countries. Not observed by me, but related by an MPD officer, were intelligence files on private families not related to the finders. The process undertaken appears to have been a systematic response to local newspaper advertisements for babysitters, tutors, etc. A member of the finders would respond and gather as much information as possible about the habits, identity, occupation, etc. of the family. The use to which this information was to be put is still unknown. There was also a large amount of data collected on various child care organizations. The warehouse contained a large library, 2 kitchens, a sauna, hot tub, and a video room. The video room seemed to be set up as an indoctrination center. It also appeared that the organization had the capability to produce its own videos. There were what appeared to be training areas for children, and what appeared to be an altar set up in a residential area of the warehouse. Many jars of urine and feces were located in this area. I should also mention that both premises were equipped with satellite dish antennas. I discussed the course of action to be taken by MPD with Detective Bradley. He stated he was only interested in making the child abuse cases. I was assured that all of the evidence would be available to U.S. Customs in furtherance of any investigation, criminal action pursued. MPD personnel were to begin around-the-clock review and sorting of the evidence until completed. Customs will have access after this is accomplished. This will include several U.S. passports discovered during the search. Upon leaving the 4th Street premises, I encountered a news media representative and was asked the reason behind U.S. Customs' involvement in the investigation. I advised the reporter that I could not discuss anything and referred her to the resident agent in charge in D.C. I left immediately thereafter. There is no further information available at this time. It should take 3 to 5 days for all the information to be sorted, reviewed, and logged by the MPD. I will maintain contact with Detective Bradley until the evidence is again accessible. Respectfully submitted, Ramon J. Martinez, Special Agent, United States Customs Service. By April 13, 1987, Special Agent Martinez filed a continuation to the report, including details of investigation where he claimed that on March 31, 1987, I contacted Detective James Bradley of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. I was to meet with Detective Bradley to review the documents seized pursuant to 2 search warrants executed in February 1987. The meeting was to take place on April 2nd or 3rd. On April 2nd, I arrived at MPD at approximately 9 a.m. Detective Bradley was not available. I spoke to a third party who was willing to discuss the case with me on a strictly off-the-record basis. I was advised that all the passport data had been turned over to the State Department for their investigation. The State Department, in turn, advised MPD that all travel and use of the passports by holders of the passports was within the law and no action would be taken. This included travel to Moscow, North Korea, and North Vietnam from the late 1950s to mid-1970s. The individual further advised me of circumstances which indicated that the investigation into the activity of the finders had become a CIA internal matter. The MPD report has been classified secret and was not available for review. I was advised that the FBI had withdrawn from the investigation several weeks prior and that the FBI Foreign Counterintelligence Division had directed MPD not to advise the FBI Washington Field Office of anything that had transpired. No further information will be available. No further action will be taken. The founder and leader of the Finders cult was a man by the name of Marion Petty, a former Air Force Master Sergeant who admitted that his son worked for CIA front Air America, which was later renamed as Southern Air Transport. By 1995, this front company was essentially overtaken by Jeffrey Epstein and Leslie Wexner, relocating its main base from Miami, Florida, to Ohio with the express purpose of running cargo for Wexner-owned companies. But we're encouraged to reduce that down to a mere coincidence. Although, according to the FBI vault documents, Petty's wife, Isabel, admittedly worked for the CIA from 1951 to 1971, and she had been given passports to restricted countries such as North Korea, North Vietnam, the Soviet Union, and elsewhere during the height of the Cold War. But this aforementioned third-party individual who spoke off the record to Special Agent Martinez, whose name was redacted in the original reports, was later confirmed as Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department Sergeant John Stitcher. By May 1992, not long before the 1993 inquiry into the allegations of CIA involvement, Sergeant Stitcher would die from a reported cause of death listed in his obituary as septic shock. However, during the initial investigation in February of 1987, Sergeant Stitcher wrote an investigative report labeled Confidential and Do Not Disseminate with the title Finders' Involvement with the Central Intelligence Agency. This largely redacted report reads that at approximately 15:30 hours, February 18, 87, Detective Redacted spoke with Special Agent Redacted, reference any contact the members of the Finders may have had with the agency. Special Agent Redacted was guarded but frank in his response. He confirmed that Redacted Isabel, now deceased, was an employee of the agency from 1950 until 1971. When asked if our investigation was treading on anyone's toes out there, Redacted replied, "Sort of." He acknowledged that they have had someone working on the case since it first broke on the news media. He also stated that the agency is aware that during the period 1969 to 1971, Redacted traveled to Moscow, North Korea, and North Vietnam. Almost 3 full lines redacted. Special Agent Redacted stated that he would contact Detective Redacted on February 19, 87, to arrange to come to this office for further discussion. As of 14:30 hours, February 19, 87, he has not contacted this office. As a practical matter, what is not being said is as important as what Special Agent Redacted has said. Redacted acknowledged that we are treading on their toes, and that they have had someone working on this case since February 5th when it broke. They apparently have a vested interest in Redacted and or the group. They have not contacted any of the investigating agencies while they have been working on the case. They are also aware that Redacted traveled to prohibited countries during a period of hostilities that could only have been arranged by them. Finally, he stated that 2-line redaction. This could explain a lot about the group's funding, which we have been unable to document to this point. Entire redacted paragraph labeled C. Regardless of what type of operation they may have been engaged in, there will be no justification for the way the children have been treated, and the matter will be addressed in Family Division Superior Court. Although the report was heavily redacted under the classification confidential, it clearly states that the CIA had a vested interest in the cult. Multiple lines of the report seem to even suggest that the CIA was potentially involved in the funding of the group. According to the work of journalist Elizabeth Voss in her series of articles found at Mint Press News, the leader of the Finders cult, Marion Petty, was also known to have had access to international military transportation, despite being allegedly retired from military service long before 1987. In a Tallahassee Police Department report dated February 10, 1987, Lieutenant Lee Hart of Culpeper, Virginia, is recorded as having stated that he had had contact with the Finders, and that Petty himself would probably go to Andrews Air Force Base and get a military plane flight to China. That law enforcement would appraise Petty as being able to simply show up at an Air Force base and obtain international transportation while the Finders were under a multi-state, multi-agency investigation, speaks to Petty's direct and active involvement with military and intelligence interests, in addition to that of his wife and son. An interview with Finders member and spokesperson Tobe Terrell, conducted by Derek Brose of the Conscious Resistance, provides some corroboration of Petty's military connections and suggests the origins of his intelligence work. Terrell told Brose that Petty was in the Army Air Corps, which became the U.S. Air Force. He was highly regarded by the brass and they asked him if he would like to become an intelligence officer. Despite this admission, during the rest of the interview, Terrell strenuously denied that the finders were linked with the U.S. government or intelligence operations. Instead, Terrell claims Petty retired after 20 years of working for the military and was trained but never assigned in intelligence work. As stated earlier, we know Petty had been a master sergeant in the Air Force, but was he still working for the military or intelligence while heading the finders group? And is this why he could so easily obtain military transportation? Petty himself admits that he began his stint in hippiedom while simultaneously working for the military. An interview with Petty conducted by the Washington City paper in 1996 states that the group's roots stretch back to a pre-World War II Washington, D.C. open house run by Petty when he was an Army sergeant. There he claims to have become a full-time student of human nature. Quote, "I rented 2 apartments about 55 years ago," he testified at the court proceedings, "and opened them up for anybody that wanted to come in, and the idea in my head was that they were going to teach me something about power, money, or sex." This admission is remarkable in that it shows that Petty's interactions with the alternative lifestyle community began very early in his military service, prior to the Second World War and the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency. We can deduce, then, that his decades of association with the dawning New Age sphere may have been associated with his military work. The description of his open apartments closely parallels the activities of recognized figures associated with the infamous MKUltra project, in which the CIA experimented with efforts to achieve mind control, sometimes on unwitting subjects. In an excerpt from his book, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s, journalist Tom O'Neill writes of Dr. Louis Jolyon West's use of a hippie open house in association with MKUltra studies funded by the CIA. In The Haight-Ashbury, West arranged for the use of a crumbling Victorian house on Frederick Street, where he set up what he described as a laboratory disguised as a hippie crash pad. The pad, opened in June 1967, at the dawn of the Summer of Love, passers-by were welcome to do as they pleased and stay as long as they liked, as long as they didn't mind grad students taking notes on their behavior. According to records in West's files, his crash pad was funded by the Foundation's Fund for Research in Psychiatry, Incorporated. Papers in West's desk that revealed that the Foundation's fund was a front for the CIA. This echoes Marion Petty's early use of 2 apartments and a later finder's property known as Ragged Mountain Ranch. The Washington Post reported that anyone could get an organic meal without charge, without questions at the rural location. In addition, a TPD report dated February 9, 1987, documents the statements of one of the children recovered in Florida to the effect that a man they knew as Mr. Lucky lived at a rural finder's property. The document adds that information from the FBI identifies Lucky as Ronald Ailman, an ex-Green Beret, with Green Beret being a reference to U.S. Army Special Forces. The child providing information regarding Ailman states that he had lots of medicine. He was also mentioned by another finder's child in reference to basements at a D.C. finder's location. That yet another member of the finders would have a military background is of interest in terms of questioning the narrative that the group was simply an alternative lifestyle commune. In closing, it's important to at least consider the perspective of Ted Gunderson, who is a special agent in charge at the FBI and head of the Los Angeles field office, even at one point on a short list to become the director of the bureau. Some of his casework for the FBI even included the death of Marilyn Monroe, as well as the assassination of JFK, later retiring from the Bureau by 1980. After the first official reports of the finder's arrest in 1987, Ted Gunderson reached out to the FBI on many occasions and in a letter to the senior special agent in charge, he said, "I filed formal complaints on 6 occasions with the FBI demanding an investigation of the finders and the international trafficking of children who have been kidnapped or obtained through subterfuge, orphanages, and on occasion, the agency known as Child Protective Services. But the FBI refused to contact me. I have received 2 complaints from airline employees that airplanes containing several hundred children were flown to Paris, France, from Denver, Colorado, and Los Angeles, California. 210 children were reportedly on the manifest of the Denver plane. In addition, Paul Bonacci told me about children who were auctioned off in the early 1980s outside Las Vegas, Nevada, and Toronto, Canada. These children were auctioned off in their underwear with a number on a card around their necks, some for $50,000 each. See the Franklin cover-up investigation. 191 children assigned to the Child Protective Services in Florida are missing with no indication of their whereabouts. 100,000 children disappear each year in America. Ted Gunderson describes the finders as a CIA front established in the 1960s. Members are specially trained government kidnappers with top clearance and protection in their assigned task of stealing children, torturing and sexually abusing them, sometimes involving them in satanic orgies, bloody rituals, and murder of other children with the slaughter of animals. The finders are known sexual degenerates who use a fleet of unmarked cars to grab targeted children from parks and schoolyards, many times using their own child members as decoys. They lure the innocent children away from the crowd, close to their vans. The adults inside grab the children, drug them, and transport them to a series of safe houses where they await their ill-fated end. They are then used in ceremonies. The children are either murdered and sacrificed for body parts, or they are sold as sex slaves, auctioned off at various locations in the Northern Hemisphere. In the past, they have been auctioned off near Las Vegas, Nevada, and Toronto, Canada, Lincoln, Nebraska, Michigan, and Houston, Texas. Marion David Petty, the leader of the cult, is an identified pedophile, homosexual, and CIA officer. His son was a former employee of the CIA proprietary firm Air America, which was notorious for smuggling drugs destined for the United States out of the Golden Triangle into Saigon during the Vietnam War. Researching subjects such as this is an absolute soul-crushing task. It's impossible to explain, but I never resurface feeling whole. It takes something out of you. This level of darkness leaves no one unscathed. God forbid if even a fraction of this is true. How can we continue about our day? As we ascend out of this dark, malignant rabbit hole, we remind ourselves of the poignant line in MLK's speech, Beyond Vietnam, when he declares that the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.